We begin tonight with the latest on the crisis in Iraq. Today, the U.S. announced that 275 U.S. armed forces are deploying to the country to provide support and security for U.S. personnel and the embassy in Baghdad. The force is deploying for the purpose of protecting U.S. citizens and property, and if necessary, it is equipped for combat. This comes just after the heightened violence that's been sweeping the country as insurgents gain a stronger foothold in the north. One by one, Iraqi cities are falling to an Islamist militant group that's determined to move forward in taking control of Baghdad. The blue dots shown here are cities that ISIS has seized recently. Last week, Mosul and Tikrit fell to rebel fighters, and just yesterday, militants took control of Tal Afar, which is just west of Mosul. The takeover of Tal Afar came just as Sunni militants claimed that they had massacred 1,700 Iraqi security forces. And in doing so, they posted graphic pictures of a mass execution in Tikrit as evidence and warning of more killing to come. Back here in Washington, the State Department announced yesterday that it had reinforced security at the U.S. Embassy and was relocating some of the U.S. Embassy's staff to more stable places in and outside of the country. At the same time, the Obama administration has been considering its approach to the situation. Right now, it says everything is on the table, from U.S.-Iranian military cooperation to unilateral airstrikes. And the latest is that the White House is even considering sending a small number of American special forces to Iraq to help Baghdad slow the insurgency. To discuss the next moves for the U.S., earlier I spoke with former Minnesota governor and host of Off the Grid, Jesse Ventura. I first asked him if the U.S. has an obligation to help de-escalate the conflict.
Well, I don't know. Let's go back to the Iraq War and how it started. I mean, it was based upon lies to begin with. When the United States entered that war way back in 2003, we were told weapons of mass destruction, ties to al-Qaeda. They all turned out to be false. They were all totally bogus. And so we go in there, we overthrow Saddam Hussein, we occupy them for 10 years, and now it's all falling apart again. Well, do you want my honest opinion? If the United States of America is going to go back into Iraq, I think George Bush and Dick Cheney should lead the way. They should be the first two on the ground in Iraq, leading us back in there.
All right. Well, multiple cities have fallen to Islamist militants. Rebels are quickly gaining control of much of the northern part of the country. So based on the momentum we're seeing right now, what are the implications for the U.S. if Baghdad actually falls to the insurgents?
I don't know. To me, it's them forming their own countries. You obviously got Muslim movements, the Shiites, the Sunnis. They don't get along. They haven't gotten along for thousands of years, and they've created these Middle Eastern countries that put them all together. Maybe we should look at this as an opportunity for the Middle East to create their own countries, to where these religions can all have their own separate countries, and that way maybe it'll bring some sort of stabilization and end this ludicrous wars that go on there for years and years and years. In other words, I'm saying maybe it's time for the rest of the world to butt out and allow them to settle their differences themselves. These are civil wars going on.
So let's go back to 2011, the official pullout of U.S. forces from the country. Critics now say that the president should have left a residual force behind after combat, or perhaps should have focused more on Iraqi Prime Minister Maliki in his approach to sectarianism. In transitioning out of Iraq, obviously should they have gone in the first place, but in transitioning out, could the U.S. have done something differently to avoid the chaos that we're seeing right now?
I don't think so. This is all internal. This is Iraq. This is religion. This is religion fighting itself over there. What could the United States possibly do to intervene and make it right? And again, we are the ones that caused all of this. We caused it by destabilizing the Iraq government when we invaded and caused war, invaded the country, occupied it, overthrew its existing government. So, you know, it doesn't surprise me a bit. Remember, I lost a job at MSNBC because I opposed the war. Nobody was opposing the war back in '03, and lo and behold, I look like a soothsayer today, don't I?
All right, well, let's talk about what options are on the table for the U.S. right now. Secretary Kerry said recently that the U.S. would be open to discussions with Iran over what to do, and it did not rule out military cooperation with the country. What are the implications of the U.S. working with Iran in this situation?
Well, you know what? I think it's wonderful, that aspect of it. But why should we be working with Iran against other Muslims over there? Why can't we stay out of it and allow them to solve their own problems? These are religious problems. You don't want to get caught up in religion and its problems. Trust me. And other military action that hasn't yet been ruled out, of course, by the administration are airstrikes and drone strikes. What are your thoughts on the United States moving forward unilaterally? Could this really do more harm than good in the end? Yes, I think it absolutely could. Every time we have a drone strike, we create that many more, quote, terrorists. It seems we're out there trying to create terrorists so we have someone to fight, because that's all these drones are doing. And as I understand it, in reading Scahill's book, they're operating in about 14 countries right now with these drones. How would we feel if another country flew drones in our country? Would we allow that? Of course not. You know, I'm a believer in Major General Smedley Butler, the two-time Congressional Medal of Honor winner who wrote the great book War is a Racket. Smedley says we need to pass a constitutional amendment that the U.S. troops cannot go over 500 miles from our border. We should pass that because we have the capability to blow up anything in the world. Why do we need our troops spread out all over the world and us policing the entire world? We got enough problems in our own backyard. Why aren't we taking care of the United States problems instead of the world problems?
Do you think it could ultimately create some blowback?
Oh, absolutely it's going to. Everything we do over there helps to create blowback. We are the foreigners. We're the ones sticking our nose in their business. Let me give it to you this way. I love to tell this story. When the United States was discovered for the Anglo-Saxon world, Columbus came here on a mission. He was trying to find a way to India by avoiding the Middle East. Now, this was 500 or more years ago. They were avoiding the Middle East. Shouldn't we kind of learn something why Columbus was willing to defy science, because at that time they believed you'd fall off the earth, that it was flat. But he was willing to fall off the earth rather than go through the Middle East. I rest my case.
So former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton stated in her recent book, Hard Choices, that voting for the Iraq War is one of her biggest regrets. She now admits that. She said, quote, "I thought I had acted in good faith and made the best decision I could with the information I had, and I wasn't alone in getting it wrong, but I still got it wrong, plain and simple." As more politicians reverse their stance on the Iraq War, I mean, do you think their new outlook could influence the U.S. response to the current crisis here?
Well, it won't matter unless it's to save their political jobs. Let's remember that. That's why Hillary's doing this now. That's why she's coming to grips. At the time, they were all on board, because if you weren't on board, you were called unpatriotic. If you didn't vote to go to war in Iraq, you were considered unpatriotic. Jesse Ventura knows that label well, because I was speaking out against the war before it happened, and I was labeled unpatriotic for doing that. So they're just being typical politicians. They're licking their finger, they're holding it up to the wind to find out where public sentiment and how they can save their political careers. The great thing about me as an independent, I didn't care about a political career. I did what I felt was right or wrong. I'm pleased Hillary has come out and said that. But why did she vote it back then? She voted it to save their political hind ends, because they would have been labeled unpatriotic and they'd have lost their next election. And for them, Democrats and Republicans, it's all about getting elected over and over and over again.
I was host of Off the Grid and former Minnesota Governor Ventura.